Hey guys, Joe here, back to the Word. In this video, we're going to hop into what was going on in the life of Spurgeon, his church, and his preaching from 1855 through 1860. Why that year range? Because of the recent set I got from Reformation Heritage Books, the first 6 volumes of Spurgeon's sermons to be released. They're going to do all 63 volumes. I'm super excited about it. I did an unboxing video of that 6-volume first set called The Revival Years on my channel, so you can get the link in the description below. I'm also going to do a video on the publication history of Spurgeon's sermons. I've built upon what they have in this volume about that, and you're going to want to check out that video. So hit subscribe, hit that notification bell, so when I drop that video, you don't miss it. But I also have other Spurgeon videos I've done that will be linked below in a playlist, all the Spurgeon videos on my channel. So check that out if that interests you. For this video, I thought it would be good for us to hop into a section of the introduction of this first volume where they talk about what was going on in the life of Spurgeon, his preaching, and his church when these sermons from 1855 to 1860 were being preached at the New Park Street Chapel. So these volumes are the New Park Street pulpit because they're the publishing of those sermons. So I'm going to pull that up for you guys. You can follow along. This is Back to the Word. My channel exists to equip and encourage you to read the Bible, good books, and have conversations that truly matter. I love Spurgeon. I love his preaching. Theology, biblical, rich, so good, Christ-centered. And I wanted to just tackle this topic and go over what was going on in the life of this man of God and the congregation and the revival that really God poured out just outside of London in his church. So if you go to the set description page on the RHB website, you can click on a sample and gives you a quick sample of the first pages of this volume right here. So what's printed in here are the sermons, are not retypeset. It's a republishing of Pilgrim Publications, sermons by Spurgeon, unabridged, unedited, unaltered, just as people in Spurgeon's day would have been reading them, which I really enjoy and am thankful for, but with new binding and a beautiful treatment. So you pull up that PDF, we see there Spurgeon's sermons. I'll put the link for that description or for this product page in the description of this video, but you can follow along on the side of your screen as well. So the New Park Street Pulpit containing the sermons by Reverend C.H. Spurgeon, Volume 1, 1855. So this publication of this set is a joint venture from RHB, Reformation Heritage Books, as the publisher, as well as Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, or most specifically the Spurgeon Library at Midwestern. So they're working together to publish these and make them available in print. So first up is a foreword by Jason K. Allen, or Dr. Allen, who's the president of Midwestern, talks about how great it is to have these back in print. It's been quite a few years since people have been able to get all 63 volumes of Spurgeon sermons, and so that's what they're going to do over time with the RHB, is make all of them available in print for today. Then we have the publisher's preface. That's Reverend Dr. Joel Beakey, who heads up RHB, and he talks about how excited they are to be doing this project as well. Then you get into the revival years, the New Park Street Pulpit, 1855 to 1860. This was Geoffrey Chang, or Dr. Jeff Chang. He writes a few things here. He goes through the publication history of Spurgeon's sermons. I'm going to do a longer video on that topic. I've taken the content from this and built upon it and added current sets that you may have in your library. How much of Spurgeon's sermons do you have? How can you get others? So I'll put that video will be coming out soon on my channel, and I'm excited. I've been learning a lot by putting that video together. But for this video, the revival at the New Park Street Chapel, page 18 of this introduction in this volume, what was going on in the life of Spurgeon, his church, and his congregation, and his preaching during these first six volumes of the 63 full volumes. So first up, about the church, the New Park Street chapel. So the New Park Street Chapel traced its roots back to the 17th century, having once been led by pastors such as Benjamin Keach, John Gill, and John Rippon. It says, after the last formidable pastor, Rippon, had passed away, there were some other pastors that took place, but this English particular Baptist church kind of fell on hard times, and there were very few people there. So when Spurgeon first stepped into the pulpit as a guest preacher in December of 1853, there were only a dozen present in a space that held about 1,000 people. So here was the situation: a teenage country preacher, a dying congregation, and a depressed neighborhood. This was the perfect setting for God to demonstrate his reviving power, and demonstrate it he did. Spurgeon was called there as the pastor in April of 1854. So preaches there first in December, called as pastor in 1854. Spurgeon was saved at 16, had been preaching at a chapel, a country chapel outside of Cambridge for about 3 years, was now 19 years old, and was called to be the pastor of this church. And so he got straight to preaching the word. And so by the summer, the chapel was filled. So it starts in April, and God has filled the chapel by the end of the summer. So from February to May 1855, sermons 6 through 27, they were working on this building, and so they decided to expand the chapel. And so for that period of time, they moved to Exeter Hall, an evangelical meeting hall that seated about 3,000 people. And so for all those weeks while that renovation was going on, the place was packed, Exeter Hall was, and Spurgeon's popularity only continued to grow. In June of 1855, the congregation returned to the enlarged New Park Street Chapel. So just a little less than a year later, they returned to the chapel, and during that time, that sermons 28 through 83, as they were waiting to get back in. And then they now were in this chapel that seated about 2,000 people. But they said Exeter Hall set 3,000, and they're moving back into a space that only holds 2,000. It was like trying to fit the ocean in a teacup or a teapot. It says hundreds of visitors were being turned away weekly. But even as they had a problem with space, God was still saving people. People were being converted. It was hard to get an admission ticket to see Spurgeon preach, but people were turning out in droves. And so in the following year, to help ease the crowds, the church returned to Exeter Hall, a 3,000 person meeting space, on Sunday evenings, and they had church at the chapel in the morning. So that's sermons 84 through 103 in the 6 volumes that have just come out from RHB. But by that fall, the directors of Exeter Hall were no longer willing to rent this meeting space to one church exclusively. They really wanted that space to be used by multiple churches. And so you have New Park Street using it every single week. And they say, you're going to have to find a different space. And so the church stepped out in faith, and they ended up going with and choosing a meetings place of the Surrey Gardens Music Hall on Sunday evenings. This was a bold step for them because it was a secular venue, and it also seated about 10,000 people. So with much anticipation, the first meeting was held on October 6th, 1856, with an audience of about 7,000. The service began as normal, but during the prayer, there was a coordinated disturbance from troublemakers who began to shout fire. This is one of the hallmark things that happened in Spurgeon's life that really he never recovered from for the rest of his life. It made an impact on him, his ministry, his preaching, how he did things, how he saw ministry for the rest of his life. So in the ensuing panic from them crying out fire in a coordinated manner, there was a stampede where 7 people were actually killed and died, and 28 were seriously injured. Spurgeon ended up losing consciousness, trying to get the crowd to be quieter, to actually get them to restore order, and he had to be carried out himself. And so for several weeks, he sank into a deep depression. As you read more on Spurgeon, I don't have time to cover it here, you'll figure out he dealt with lots of health-related things in his lifetime, as well as deep depression. So he dealt with gout, he dealt with some other health-related issues, and deep bouts of depression. And this is one of the deepest that he actually had, and he took time away from preaching for a while. It says for several weeks, he fell into deep depression and could not preach. and that's the time gap we have in these sermons from 103 to 104. With his congregation praying for him, he was able to return to the pulpit, but he would carry the scars of that night for the rest of his life. And so for the next 3 years, they continued to preach at this Surrey Music Hall. Sermons 104 to 289, he would preach in the morning at the music hall and then would preach in the evening at the New Park Street Chapel. But amid all of this growth, Spurgeon was really at a crossroads. Meeting in 2 venues meant that he was really preaching and ministering to 2 churches. He wanted one church, one congregation, baptisms, meaningful membership, and he was very torn. It was hard for him and the elders to actually care for all the members of the church. And so the congregation was not willing to lose its pastor. Ultimately, he was not going to be able to do this for much longer. And so in September of 1856, they voted to raise the funds necessary to build what would become the Metropolitan Tabernacle, a much larger meeting space. So Spurgeon's fundraising efforts, as well as the congregation's giving, they would lay the first stone of this new tabernacle in summer of 1859. So the sermons during that period, 268 to 270, is when he's laying that foundation. By the following summer, along with other evangelical leaders and representatives, they would hold their first meeting in this unfinished building to commemorate the tabernacle's near completion, sermons 331 and 32. In anticipation of the move, Spurgeon would preach his last sermon at the Surrey Gardens Music Hall on December 11th, 1859. So that's sermon 289 in this 6-volume collection. And the congregation would then move back to Exeter Hall until the completion of its new building in 1861, which would be sermons 290 through 347. So in just 7 years, through the power of God's working in the preaching of the word, this dying congregation of a few dozen would go on to become the largest congregation in all of evangelicalism. Some people call it the first real mega church. But what's unique about it, as you read about Spurgeon, is he took membership in that church seriously, meaningful membership, more than just a crowd for a preaching station, the New Park Street Chapel. So it wasn't just a place for Spurgeon's preaching. It would become unanimous with lots of other facets of ministry, including discipleship, gospel proclamation, prayer, benevolence, Christian publishing, pastoral training, church planting, international missions, and much, much more. Spurgeon and his congregation have had an impact that continues to be felt in our day. So I'll go ahead and pull the notes down. I'm just super excited to get into these sermons and to see what was going on during this period. How a 19-year-old pastor called to preach, and God would do amazing things to move them through all of these different venues as God was working and adding to their number. So I'm excited to get into his sermons. They are biblical, Christ-centered, theologically rich. I've already read a few of these. If you've never read a sermon, these are a treat, and I would encourage you to check out this series that RHB is publishing. So I bought these first 6 volumes, revival years, and they also come with an index for all 63 volumes that will eventually be republished. These have been published in other editions before, but they're really hard to get a full set to get your hands on if you don't have a family member who owns one or knows someone who would gift it to you. And so I'm excited that RHB and Midwestern are putting them back in print. Would challenge you to check them out, check out what they're doing, check out the product page linked below, as well as my other videos on Spurgeon's sermon publication history that'll be coming out soon, as well as the unboxing video I did for these 6 volumes if you want to know more about them. So until next time, continue to read, treasure, follow the word. God bless, and I'll see you guys soon.